Morning, guys. Welcome to the Truth About Real Estate podcast show. Today we have Scott Choppin, is the founder and CEO of Urban Pacific Group, and has been at the forefront of innovation in housing solutions for over 20 years. Scott oversees all the operations at Urban Pacific and includes business development, capital acquisitions, and strategic planning. We're fortunate to have him here. He has 9 family offices, over 3,400 plus units developed, and over 900 million plus in projects exited. Welcome to the show, Scott. Glad to have you.
Great to be here, Matthew. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, thanks. It's end of 2020 right now. It's almost a new year in a few days. So wanted to, connect with you and learn more about everything you've been doing and how you've been so successful over 20 plus years in investing in real estate. So let's get on and talk about everything going on.
Yeah. So, just like brief background, real estate development company, as you indicated, 20 years. In fact, 2020 was our 20th year of operations as a real estate developer. Have a family background. My uncle Mike and my dad Kerry were both developers in their own right, which sort of, informed my, future career decisions. Spent several years, worked in the trades for a while. Sort of made my way to college, graduated with a finance degree, and then ultimately went to work for a handful of, locally well-known companies in the real estate development environment to basically get, knowledge and the capabilities as a developer, and then left those companies in 2000 to form Urban Pacific. And we've really been focused, in that entire time on really an urban housing offer would be the way to think of it, Matthew. So infill, what we call infill, which is developing sites that are already in the city that may be vacant or underutilized. And then for the last 4 years, we've been focused exclusively on a workforce housing product type that we created called Urban Townhouse. And so, basically that's, it's been, urban housing that entire 20 years and actually won't change. We'll continue to do that for the rest of my career. It's a great space to be in.
How did you even get started into real estate, like in wanting to go into development and, specifically urban housing? Like, how did that all come about?
Yeah, so I had a family background in it, like I mentioned earlier, but it's like any teenager, you sort of like choose to do something different than what your parents, like you want to do the exact opposite, right, for a period of time.
Yeah.
And so I was in that. And then when I graduated from high school, I just didn't really have a clear picture of what I wanted to do. And so I ended up working in the construction trades, doing electrical work for about 2 years. And during that period of time, a couple of key events happened for me that really sort of showed me what I wanted to do in the future. And so that one, as I mentioned, I had this background in real estate development, right? Which you go, oh, well, if somebody's been around that, they should know all about that. But it's interesting because I didn't really have the deal-making background. Like I saw what my family did, but I wasn't doing it day to day. Like I was almost like an outside observer of it, although I knew what developers did, right? So I worked in the trades for a couple of years, and that taught me basically what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to do physical labor. I was working actually doing construction on apartment buildings. So that was, I saw that happen. So that gave me good background on like how a project went together physically, like the construction part of it. And then I remember like in one project, construction works hard, right? You can't sustain it for long term. I was making more money at 18 and 19 years old than anybody I knew. But also the people I was working with were good people, but they were beat up, right? 40 or 50 years old, working outside, doing construction, and residential construction is like pretty easy compared to, big industrial projects or commercial projects, that kind of thing. But still, people's backs were bad, their knees were bad, you're that whole thing. So clearly didn't what I didn't want to do. And I remember on one of the projects, I was working and the developer pulled up in front of the site and I happened to see him. Well, I knew who that guy was, right? I knew what a developer was. And, he had the nice car and wearing the suit and tie. And it sounds ridiculous as I speak that story, but I go, I know who that guy is. And I want to be that guy. I don't want to be dirty and tired and, making X dollars, ultimately I want to be the guy who drives a nice car and clearly is the boss and in command. And this is his project. Like he's an entrepreneur. Okay. So that was event number one. Event number two was really just I've had a habit of, competitive learning my entire life. And so even as, early as 18, 19 years old, I was reading lots of books, anything I could get my hands on. And I came across a series of real estate books. But one of them was one of those classic, how to invest and make $1 million in real estate working on the weekends, or, how to invest, on weekends and make $1 million. And, it was a simple book. But what that book taught me, Matthew, was how to make deals, right? How to find an undervalued asset, improve it, and sell it or own it in the long run, like value add, what we call that today, right? This book didn't call it that. How to buy low and sell high, right? So what ultimately sort of coalesced into this was that real estate development is the ultimate form of value add, right? You're taking an empty piece of land, you're building a brand new building, and then you're renting it to tenants who produce income and cash flow for value or long-term ownership. And so real estate development had the background, worked in the field. And so at 19 years old, basically, I've sort of all came together for me. I go, oh, I got to be, I want to be a real estate developer. I know now what deal making is. I can see how one could be, build wealth and take care of your family well by doing this career. And so from that point on, really, it was, here's my plan, go to college, work professionally for, a period of time, and then ultimately work for myself as an entrepreneur.
Oh, that is definitely a handful of knowledge, and it's also really wise that you figured this out, and with your family too. Figured this out at 19 years old. I don't think most people at 30s and 40s have even figured out what they really want to do, but by doing that specifically at such a young age and being, I would say mentor to coach or being in the industry and having knowledge, you're able to attain it faster, and you understand that education is highly valuable. The more you read, the more you learn, and just intake from all the great successful people, especially a lot of books. You're really going into CEOs' brains, writers' brains of how they actually do things, and you're getting firsthand experience, and they're telling you out of their body and soul. And that's one of the most valuable things I find, is really listening to people talk, listening to podcasts, listening to them speak, and even reading about them and everything they're doing. I think that's one of the best forms of training and educating you to grow successfully, and taking that mindset and using it now to executing on it makes you highly successful. And you've done it so quickly too. And even 20 years, and if you started, when you're 19, you're going fast, right? Yeah. And to do that much volume. So when you're reading these books, what's the mindset to get you to over the humps, the fear, the rejections, and to actually take the risk and do it, execute on it?
Meaning like for projects or a business?
To jump into become a real estate developer. For example, from a contractor, handyman to go to a developer. How do you do that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I talk to people a lot about this, like that transition period from working professionally to having your own gig, right? Running your own company. And it's a key transition point. So just to offer a little bit of background. So I actually worked professionally for several years, as I mentioned, to get that training, right? And so at 32 is when I left my professional career, working for others, and then went out on my own. And by the way, statistically, that early 30s is classically when people leave to become entrepreneurs, right? Like that, they've got enough background in whatever their professional career is and knowledge in that space to be able to then at least see the idea of sustainable, creation of a business to be a sustainable model, right? So actually, I'll offer this. So if anybody goes to my LinkedIn page, it's just under Scott Choppin, and look for articles that I've written. And in there's an article I wrote called 6 Ways to Build Your Real Estate Development Career. And some of the stuff I'm going to, answer to your question are in there. But, really to make the transition, I think of a couple different main points. One is knowledge, like you mentioned that before, like becoming knowledgeable. And you obviously can get some of that from books. But the real estate development industry is different enough than just regular real estate investing. Like you have new construction and working with architects and planning and zoning and politics. That's different enough to really where you got to be like savvy about either working with people who know these things or learning from others, right? So, I talk about in the article, get a mentor, right? Do an internship, joint venture. Michael Blanc, who's got a great podcast, he says, JV, have a first deal be a joint venture with somebody who's got track record and capital and knowledge, bring them the deal or whatever value you can bring them. And then, yeah, you're getting a smaller piece of a deal, but you get to sit on their shoulder and watch how the deal goes and learn and, let somebody else take the predominance of the risk. And I think that's highly valuable. So knowledge, right? So you got to get enough knowledge to be effective, right? And then networks to me is the other one, really. If I look at my career transition at 32, I had a great amount of knowledge. Like, I think at that point, I was completely capable to be self-sufficient as a real estate developer, like from a technical standpoint, like doing the project execution. But what I really look back on it where I was lacking is I didn't have enough networks of capital, of joint venture partners. And so what I think about now, and I even advise people this, so I left when I was 32. If I had taken a different approach and said, I'm going to work for another 5 years professionally, or even 2.5. I mean, five's not magic, with this express purpose of having an executive or senior level position for a professional, development company, and then have people that are in your networks you would build networks of capital providers that see you in action as an executive, right? See you take profit and loss responsibility and execute, and you have, good capabilities, and you're trustworthy and you produce value, so that you leave at 37 or 35 or whatever the, age that you would be when you leave, that you've specifically developed that network of professional investors, professional colleagues, right? I built all that, Matthew. You need to do that to be successful in this business. But I did it the hard way, or harder way, maybe is the way to do it. So knowledge, right? Capability to act effectively in your domain, and then networks of capability is what I call it. In other words, if I had, 100 investors versus 10, I can do more projects, or I can do, like bigger projects, like scale them more. So those would be the two that I really think about as far as, and there's some other practical stuff. So, I recommend people have at least 3 years of household, operating capital saved, right? If your burn rate at your house is 10 grand a month, have 3 years, because really what ends up happening is it takes time, right? To find the first deal, to get it up and running, to produce profit that can then, cover your household expenses. And I tell people, look, if you have 6 months extra savings, maybe it's enough to get you to that first deal that really pays off and puts you in a more patient position. So you're not having to give a lot up in your first deal, which, you may do anyways. But, if you're really desperate for cash flow because you only got a year's worth of savings, you're going to have to give up more in that early deal. And, maybe that's a sustainable model, but, for many people, it's not. And, so other practical things, it goes deep, in that subject matter, but I'll stop there.
I completely agree. Like, you actually gave some really important points I want to jump back to. I think, like, even in my career, I've been in real estate for over 13 years. I was an investor, San Francisco investor, starting at 24, bought my first single family house, bought my first multi-unit at 29, and bought another building at first. But these things come back to really, having mentorship, having doing internships, doing joint venture, having a track record, and building capital knowledge. And that comes with the part of, being open to say that, hey, I can't, in the beginning, when you're first starting, no matter how old you are, is that you really do need to value a mentor your trusted mentor who's going to guide you and show you the ropes, and find someone who's good and wants to help you, and no matter the split or the difference, it's really about finding the right person that can help accelerate your growth. Because without that, you're going to try to do everything yourself, try to learn everything yourself. You're going to do a lot of failures, and you're going to waste a lot of time. I realized over time that time is one of the most valuable assets, right? People don't realize time. Time is not free. Time costs a lot of money, and people don't value that because it's not, a physical, right? So that part about it too is working with people who can bring you to the next level. So, you mentioned other syndicators out there, other knowledgeable coaches and mentors. That pays dividends really quickly, because if you can get your foot in the door within the first 90 days, 6 months, 1 year, you're going to save years trying to do it yourself. And 100% of zero is still zero, right?
Yeah.
People don't realize that, and they go, I can just learn it. It's not that easy. Real estate syndications, investing, development is not a one-man job. You can't just learn it by yourself. Yeah. You have to work with a valuable team who can show you. And if they work with you and trust you, then, you're going to do a lot of business. And over time, you're going to build into the networks, like you mentioned. You're going to be able to meet with a lot of people, see how they work, learn from them, network with them. And when you're ready to do your own development or syndications, then you can take that next step, right?
That's right. I agree with all that. Yeah. So it's the you can make deposits in the bank account of experience or learn from others' experience. And it's going to be much more effective in time and lost money and mistakes to, watch others do it versus, I mean, people will learn, right? Like, entrepreneurs are self-selected to launch, and take risk. But, really where I sit in my career today is all about risk mitigation, right? Take the risk because that's how you produce the value and the profit, but do it in a way that, doesn't destroy you if it goes wrong, right? And, we know real estate is a cyclical business, and that cycle, I've watched people, including our own selves, get just, like the economy will rough you up or destroy you. Now, we were fortunate that it didn't do the destroying part, but, gosh, we learned a lot.
Yeah, and you guys have been doing it for so long already. You even in 20 years, you're still learning. Even today, I bet you're still learning something different, right? It's not exactly the same forever. Like
Yeah.
for example, who would have known COVID-19 would ever hit and how that affects the whole global economy, right?
Yeah.
No one would know that or project it. And even 20 years later, you don't know what's going to happen. And the fact is, you're trying to do risk mitigation throughout time and capital preservation and understanding of how to keep growing. And that's a great thing to do. So, like, how did you guys succeed over the 20 years?
Well, I mean, in the startup phase, we did joint ventures. We were building our networks of investors. We had a great idea, which was urban housing. So back in 2000, urban housing wasn't, a known commodity like it is today. Like in 2000, it was urban housing was your artist loft in downtown LA, right? Where, somebody fixed up an old red brick building. It was cool space, but it was very much underground, right? Nobody was doing it, in a professional manner. And then, we're really at the leading edge of that. So a few key things. We talked about knowledge. We talked about networks. One of the things is to find uncommon offers, or, people might call it a niche, right? Something that reduces competition, which itself is a way of mitigating risk, right? I think classically, people who are new to a business environment like real estate investing or real estate development will see what everybody's doing and then do that too. And I don't say that's a wrong move. Where I go with it is, what's the confidence level that will succeed, and what's the confidence level that who picks that offer will succeed also, right? So everybody in the period of time in 2009, 2010, everybody was flipping houses, right? Tons of people, and everybody was getting into it. And again, I don't say that's a wrong move. I just say when you do that, you really got to look at it and you go, okay, if everybody else is doing this, like that is a signal that, oh, it must work, so I'll do it too. I'm completely opposite. I look at it and I go, if everybody else is doing it, like I should not be doing it, right? Contrarian, right? What people call that. But you got to pair that with knowledge, right? Like, part of the reason that people who are new to the business pick what everybody else is doing or what the common offer is because, there's confidence in their low knowledge state that this is a move that they can create and be successful in it. In fact, it's the exact opposite, right? It's where everybody's competing, where you beat cost of capital will beat you, financial capabilities, better networks will, it's really easy to beat somebody in a common offer, right? Then you get people who are entrenched, right? I'm the biggest, house flipper in LA. I got a lot of capital. I got a lot of networks. I got a lot of knowledge. I'm going to be able to beat the small new entrant into that space almost every time, right? Or that new entrant has to overpay for that asset to get it away from the seasoned person. And then they overpaid, and then the deal pressure's on them. And then, that this increases the likelihood of failure because they overpaid, right? Or they didn't know enough to not overpay. So those would be examples of it. And then, to continue to answer your question, I mean, we went through the 2008 recession, and that was, just to be quite blunt about it, it was brutal. It was like, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And so, we were at the time building a lot of urban infill condo product, right? So for sale units, but in the urban environment, right? Middle and high density. And so, one of the things is, when the shit hits the fan, to be real blunt about it, Matthew, I mean, we saw two really main things that people did. Either they stuck around and figure out how to fix it and get through the process and try to, maintain and sustain value, or, and this is not what we did, but, I talked to people, other people just left town. Shit hit the fan, was hardest time ever. So, obviously we're in the middle of the 2020 recession, and I think real estate, at least certain types of real estate, residential, multifamily, is fairly well, supported, right? Versus, hotels and other product like that. That's obviously being heavily hit. So there's that, just sort of like a transparency and honesty and communication, right? I would always offer people that if they're having trouble in a deal, to communicate with your team, right? Communicate with your investors, communicate with your lenders, and just tell them, look, it's not, the market turned against us. We're here, we're sticking around, we're working to fix it. I don't know how it's going to work out. But we're not going away, and we're going to put all of our resources, to sustain the deal. And that's, in fact, what we did through the 2008 recession.
That's smart.
Having those savings that we talked about, even when you're a seasoned entrepreneur, you still should have savings that can sustain you for 3 years, right? Whether it's for the company or yourself personally or both, right? Preferably. And then the last part of it really is we get into this, really high level, sort of knowledge, and really what it is innovation, right? Innovation is what we talked about. So when people say, oh, don't do what everybody else is doing, be contrarian, that's the first step in that process. But then when you're contrarian, you got to have an innovation or something new and creative and valuable that can be what you move to, what you pivot to when you're going to be contrary to the marketplace, right? You can't pivot to nothing. Right? You can't innovate. You can't I'm going to be contrarian into a marketplace that doesn't exist, or maybe it's a bad marketplace. Maybe there's no demand in that marketplace because nobody wants it, right? So innovation, and then I think just networks, back to networks, and then the last part is just really having the capability to be conservative in your underwriting at all times. So I'll end with this. The saying I have is that when somebody is a young entrepreneur or a young project manager or somebody working for a company, when you're young, you sort of have a certain invincibility, right? I always used to say, look, I can get any deal done, right? When I worked for big, corporate developers, I would take on, all kinds of hairy stuff, right? And I am a great problem solver. But now I go, there's certain problems that I just don't want to solve. I don't want to solve environmental issues, leaking underground tanks, or, dirty sites, or really difficult, political process for entitlements. We go, look, we know how to do that stuff, but I'm actually going to not do it. I'm going to choose to look for an easier, simpler, less complex process, right? So young entrepreneurs will always assume that they can figure out how to get it done, right? That they're self-selected entrepreneurs that way, right? My Uncle Mike always used to say, entrepreneurs are people that need to get from A to B, and there's no clear plan or no book about how to get to A to B. You got to figure it out, right? You got to create something new and figure out how to get it from A to B. So, try to get into that seasoned, conservative underwriting. The joke I was making was, oh, if the deal needs 950 to make the deal work for rents, I got a 2-bedroom apartment's 950, but the market's 900. Well, in the old days, you go, oh, I think I could figure out how to get it to 950. I'll do something different, and I'll market it different, and I got a better location. I go, dude, I gotta figure out how to be under 900, or have so much better real true value that the 950 is real, right? Versus just thinking I can get 950 when the market's 900. No, you gotta be very dispassionate about it. And then the final thing is, I'm all about reduction of complexity or simplification. And I don't mean simple, I just mean reduction of complexity. And that's in deal making, in your development, in your deals, right? So the more complex something is, the less profitable it's going to be, right? In fact, my saying is complexity is the enemy of profits in real estate development, right? So I'm all about today for our company and our product type, really simplifying at every level: systems, product type, locations, politics, how we build the projects, our specifications, our designs. Every little part of the overall organization structure of a real estate development deal, I'm looking how to reduce complexity, because that's going to add to my bottom line, make it go faster, make it be less expensive, or at least be able to hold my budget, right? To hold the line on the budget. So those would be several things I would offer that, anybody can do at any time in their career, whether they're starting or seasoned or, in the middle. These would always be things. And I think this is applicable to whether it's deal making for investment or real estate development. I think I see those as two different product categories in real estate. This would apply really fundamentally everywhere.
Nice. This is a lot of information, a lot of tips right here. I actually want to break some of those back down. One thing to start with, you just mentioned complexity is the enemy of real estate profits. Can you give me the exact line you just said?
Yeah, what I say is, in real estate development, complexity is the enemy of profits.
Okay.
So in other words, more complex is going to likely reduce profits. Simplification is likely to add to the bottom line, right? Like sort of inversely related.
Nice. So yeah, I'm actually writing that down. Actually, I think everyone needs to kind of take that back in and realize that you're right. Complexity is the enemy of profits, and the simplification is one of the best things, actually. And I've actually been doing that for 20 years now, or more than 20 years, in real estate and in technology and development and systems and processes. And by doing that simplification, what happens too is you're actually giving more energy back to the user, for example, the workers, and you're making it less complex. And by doing that, they can actually focus better on higher quality standards and develop faster, right? Whether it's technology, whether it's real estate investing, same strategies. Make things simpler so that way you have more time to focus and create better energies to create better profits. So it's going back to what you just said at first, you were talking about all these different topics of how to sustain, how to grow, how to build your network out. You mentioned, high density areas. One thing I was going to ask you here is too, is how during the 2008, people left and you guys got over it. You guys found the way to get over the hurdles. You stuck around, you dug in deep, but by doing that, you're actually, taking that initiative to say, hey, we're going to move forward, we're going to press through, we're going to go through all the failures and challenges and figure out the solutions. And by doing that, that's where people succeed and become really successful. And by going through those hurdles, they know in the future when they see a hurdle, it'll be completely different. Like 2008 and 2020 are completely different, but you still have that initiative to say, I'm going to get through this. I know what challenges we went through and how to get through the next challenges. So you just don't give up and fail. I think one of the things is you only fail when you quit.
Yeah, agreed.
Nice.
And you learn a lot too, by the way. Failure is the best teacher. I don't know. That's probably some famous quote, but the deposit into the bank account of experience, like that's what I mean when I say that, right? Like, and in fact, just to offer a lot of the lessons that we learned in 2008, how to underwrite deals, how to make assessments of risk, how to plan for contingent liabilities or black swan events, all came from 2008, really. And we carried all those lessons forward. And in fact, the UTH model over the last 4 years, all of our developments since 2000, really 2011, when we started back up, post 2008 recession, have all been informed by that. But the UTH, urban townhouse model that we work on specifically, really has so many lessons that came from that time period. And I don't wish anybody to ever have to go through a recession to learn the hard way. And in fact, that's what a joint venture partner or a mentor and internship will teach you, is like, we have interns that intern for our company and people that we joint venture with. And, I don't tell them, hey, I learned this in 2008 and we're applying it to the deal, but they're going to get those lessons. They're going to get that knowledge that's brought forth to it. You're right. Our preparation, anticipation of 2020, we started 3 years ago. In fact, we created UTH 4 years ago as a way to work inside the anticipated next recession, right? Like it was a defensible space, a marketplace, and a type of product that wasn't highly competed for, automatically or naturally making it a less competitive, more defensive space, a marketplace where a lot of people didn't compete. That was a lesson from 2008. Like, don't compete where everybody else is. Because if you're with everybody else is and the market turns against you, if everybody's flipping houses and you are too, and the market for flip houses declines, guess what? There's a lot of people trying to move a lot of product in that marketplace. So I go, I don't want to be there. I want to be in some place where if the market does turn against me, maybe we're at break even, or maybe we reduce, profits, but we're not destroyed. Right. Several others. Conservative underwriting comes from that time period too.
I completely agree. Like when I first started real estate investing in strategies and working in sales, I actually focused on multi-unit buildings. At 24, I started selling multi-unit families in San Francisco. And then my mentor told me that, you can choose any product. You're young, you can choose condos, but why do that? You can take the challenges up front. Since you're pretty financially savvy, go for multi-units. And by doing that, it got me forward. Like, hey, my average client is 65 plus. It's not 24-year-olds buying houses, right? And by doing that, I got to learn faster and accelerate my business in multi-units and go to bigger units. And that helps a lot because that pushes you into thinking, how do you invest as yourself as a 24-year-old? How do you buy into multifamilies, and how do you acquire in San Francisco or out of state? And by doing that, you can learn, and that's part of picking your niche, right? So really seeing and not doing what everyone else is doing. When you start real estate sales, everyone goes to condos, single family homes, lower price points. Why not go higher, right? And start investing with it too. And the number one goal we learned as when I started was, real estate is really the way to move you forward into investing. See the deals, find the deals, and take the deal, right? And that's, you're getting the first hand pick at the deals, so go for it. Part of it too, you mentioned, is networking and building the knowledge and innovation. So, being contrarian to taking what everyone else is doing is actually a great approach. Like, for example, I never invest in real estate, commercial real estate, or those kind of spaces. I actually prefer multi-units the best because you actually need it. People need to live there. No matter what happens in the economy, in recessions, people need a house. They don't need office space. They don't need condos. They don't need commercial spaces. They need a house. So you're a safer bet. And choosing urban homes too is a great bet as well, because not everyone's doing that. A lot of investors are taking multifamilies right now, all over the US, all over the country, right? Because that's what everyone else is doing right now too. And everyone's adding value to properties too. So like you mentioned, you're getting to a highly competitive space. People are going to undercut. And even though everyone's doing it, you don't know why they're doing it. I've seen for example, some contractors and construction teams, they're flipping houses like crazy, but they even tell you, we're not making any money. I'm only flipping the house to sustain my employees during the recession. I'm making zero profit, right? And he goes, but the goal is this. I'm going to be here at the end of it. Rather than fail, I'm just going to flip at zero profit to make sure everyone can feed their family. I'm like, wow, that's really nice and appreciative of you doing that, not just folding because you're taking care of your crew and their family members during the time of need, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's important. That's where you're understanding if you're in a specific niche, the competition's less. You're not fighting for the lowest bottom profit, right? And you're not selling because you need to sell. You're selling because you want to. You can do it. And being conservative is one of the most important things. Like, some people are aggressive underwriters, some people are conservative, but now with COVID, you got to be even more conservative because it still is unknown. Let's say the vacancy is 3% vacancy, 90%, 7% occupancy, and you go, hey, 85, but no, with COVID, I'm going to 70, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't get the deal, you don't get the deal. And never choose a hairy deal. Like, never want to put yourself into a complex situation that you can't get out of, even though you think it might work. Why even put your money into that, right?
Yeah.
Some people do that. I'm like, that's crazy. I would always walk away from a hairy deal. It's not worth your time and effort.
That idea of I can do the hairy deal. Like, somehow you or me or that person choosing is more special. It's like, no, it's actually the opposite. You're not special. And I don't mean to be harsh on people, but less than somebody who's seasoned. Like, if you're a new entrant into that marketplace, that's why guys like you and me, we want the easiest deals we can find.
Exactly.
I tell my land acquisition team, I want the flat, square land site, no slope. Somebody the other day, I was helping a guy, and he goes, hey, I could use your advice on this deal. So I just helped him for a few minutes, and he sent it to me. It was like this really high slope deal. I was like, dude, don't. It's like, but I like it. And I can get it cheap. And I go, I know you can. And you're going to get hammered on building on a hillside, dude. So, like, don't. In fact, I told him, I go, I don't buy hillside sites. Not ever. Like, never, ever.
Hey, it has amazing views. And by the way, the rocks are all falling down. They're going to all, evaporate over time.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're, if you're a billionaire and you want to buy the hillside site, then money's no object, right? But if your goal is to make a profit, then reducing complexity. This is an example of it. Go build on a flat site versus a slope site, just reducing that complexity, time, energy, money, all reduced, saved, right, if you will.
Because I don't think they think about like environmental studies, looking at the how to sustain the building, and erosion is going to happen, and you're near the hillside. How do you predict that cost? Is so complex. You can't. Even engineers can't. They need to go figure it out, and that's just going to cost you a lot of money. So, like you just said, flat land is just easy. So why not just take the easy route? Who wants to jump into complex routes?
It's not sexy sometimes, Matthew. It's like
Yeah.
boring. I love boring.
Boring pays the bills.
More boring.
I hear that a lot too. A lot of people say, "I love commercial real estate. It's sexy and makes a lot of money." I'm like, okay, take a look at historically. How much money is it really made? How much time do you spend per project? And how much risk and failures do you have throughout? And how much complexity do you have with permitting, studies, and everything going on? The likelihood of failure is so high. If you can get through it, great.
And by the way, I'll echo, like, we think of housing as a fundamental biological need, right? As a human being with a biological body, you need shelter, right? So like I'm right with you. I go, at the end of the day, people need to live in shelter. And so let's be the shelter providers, right? Versus something else.
Nice. And in urban housing, what do you guys do to make your housing stand out and what area, how do you choose your areas, and how do you help the community?
So our product type is called Urban Townhouse, or UTH, and it's a pretty differentiated product type. And I'll describe it a little bit. So we build a 3-story townhouse, garage on the ground floor. And then our product specifically is differentiated in that we build a 5-bedroom, 4-bath townhouse unit. And our specific purpose in building that style of unit, that size, and those number of bedrooms is that we want to serve 2 populations predominantly. We want to serve working families with multiple earners, right? And that live multi-generationally, right? And then the other group that we serve are also multiple earners, but they may be professional, like think roommates, right? Would be the way to describe it, right? And so in California, we have a lot of middle income families that, have 2 or 3 or 4 wage earners in the household. They share incomes and expenses across the family group, a concept they call economic sharing. But they don't necessarily have a housing type that suits their like family style necessarily. I mean, they could go rent houses, of course, but the supply of rental houses versus apartments in California is very lopsided, right? Like there's just not as many houses for rent as there are apartments, right? And there's no 5-bedroom, 4-bath apartments. Like at scale, we're the only group that is developing this, and we see this as a niche, right? We go, oh, working class families, 2, 3, 4 wage earners, live multi-generationally, like, culturally or otherwise, that they, grandparents, in-laws, adult kids live at home. And that's like a natural, natural part of how they live, right? We're just giving them a unit, Matthew, that serves their family lifestyle appropriately and is for rent. One of the ways that we make it multi-generationally is in all of our units are standardized, like same floor plan that we build classically, and each project will have a ground floor bedroom bathroom. So that's where an older in-law or a grandparent could live, right, who has mobility issues. We have these 2-car garages, right? I mean, how many apartments? I never had an apartment that I rented that had a 2-car garage, right? So basically it's a rental product that lives like a house, right? You've got 3 stories townhouse. So it's, your own family living above and below yourself, row home style, right? Which has turned out to be, by the way, a great marketing move in the coronavirus era, is that when you go out the front door, you're outdoors, right? There's no common hallways, no entry foyers, no elevators that you're riding in, with other tenants that you don't know. And then on the other side is the garage, your 2-car garage, like, you would have in a house. So it's a very unique product type. And then part of what goes with that, with this UTH model, is because we're really serving these middle income families predominantly, we're really going into working class neighborhoods. And that's actually a huge differentiator for us. Like, we don't compete with other developers for land, because most people who are developing need the highest end market to get the best rent for high density, right? Your classic market rate. We're basically charging on average $3,500 a month for this 5-bedroom unit, which makes it, for a family, that's $700 per bedroom, right? Compared to, if you were renting a studio or a 1 or a 2-bedroom, you're probably easily paying $1,000 per bedroom, and likelihood in most markets way more than that, right? On average, we're about $2 a foot. In Southern California, you're anywhere from $3.50 to $5 a foot, for your rental rates. So we get this naturally occurring affordability. We serve this family, multi-generational lifestyle, multiple earners in the household, right? It's economic sharing. So very, very differentiated strategy. And then, so we call it an A product in a B and C neighborhood. So the product is brand new, quartz countertops, sort of a nice vinyl, plank wood style flooring, 2-car garage, in-unit laundry room, air conditioning, right? Brand new unit. So in these neighborhoods, one of the ways we differentiate it is if you go into a lot of our neighborhoods, there's not any new housing for many decades in some cases. So we just finished a project leasing up in Fullerton, which is in Orange County, near where our headquarters is. In that neighborhood, we're the first new project in probably 40 plus years. So if you're a family who already lives in that, working class lifestyle, working class neighborhood, but you would like to upgrade it to a new unit, there's nothing available. You would have to move out of Fullerton, or you'd have to go into a 1-bedroom. Well, if you're a family of 6, you're not moving into a 1-bedroom or a studio. And so you go, I don't have the choice. In fact, a lot of our people who come visit us to lease, they go, oh, we didn't even know this existed. Really, you have a 5-bedroom new apartment? It's totally new for them, which is great because they see a lot of value in it, right? And it's attracted to them. And then I'll finish with this. Actually, during the coronavirus era, we're seeing a huge uptick in roommate living, which we knew when we go into recession, people combine together to live in an economic sharing lifestyle, whether it's a family related or roommates, but everybody makes that move fundamentally, right? Like they get defensive, they reduce cost and housing and other costs as much as they can. And part of the way that is to share, right, with others, the cost load. And so we always anticipated that would be, something that would be attractive, our units during the downturn. Well, we just finished leasing Fullerton. We leased at $5 a month, which is probably a record in, of what we can tell leasing, absorption rates in SoCal. And then we're $250 to $450 a month over pro forma. So our underwrite was $3,250. We underwrote this a while ago, so that was our rent level, and we're getting $3,700 a month. So we're above pro forma in arguably one of the worst economic recessions that I used to say that about 2008 that was the worst. This is the worst from an economic downturn scenario, right? Economic activity, although multifamily is relatively well performing, although we have obviously eviction moratoriums and that kind of thing, but our rent collections have been 99% plus, so we haven't had any issues. The families that we rent to and the roommates that we rent to, they recognize the great opportunity that they have to live in this 5-bedroom unit. And we never say we're bulletproof, by the way, but we just go, we're such an attractive, unusual offer to a tenant that they don't want to mess that up, right? They go, look, this is a great unit. I like living here. This is a good situation for my family or for my roommate group. We got to keep this thing. And so I think that just is really benefited from a collection standpoint in our UTH program.
I'm super happy to hear that too, because during coronavirus there's a lot of vacancy, there's a lot of evictions, there's post evictions after this, but not a lot of rent being collected. Some people can afford to pay, but they don't want to pay. Some people don't have money to pay, and landlords are stuck here in the middle of it, and they still have to pay their mortgage. There's no real delay in mortgages for everyone, right? Not everyone can just bow out and not pay their mortgage because they just want to build and sustain their credibility. But the fact is that you mentioned for U2H, that your costs, for example, is $2 a foot versus the market at $350 to $5 a foot is really cool in the sense that you're creating natural affordability and lifestyle, and you're able to create such beautiful homes, especially a 5-bedroom, 4-bath for $35 to $3,700 a month in LA Fullerton area. That's really good, and I agree that mindset of setting up the structure that way is super beneficial to tenants because where can you find that easily and find a 5-bedroom, 4-bath? You can't. In 2 floors and 2-car garage, you can't find this. So you're right. Who would want to really mess it up unless they can't afford it, right? And by having multifamilies in the household and multi-wage earners, the percentage of people who actually can't afford it in a group would be less likely to happen. So you create that sustainability and the comfort knowing that your product is a product in a BC neighborhood, then you're creating that sustainability. But now when your investor group actually thinks about it and looks at it, they're like, wow, this totally makes sense, right? So the fact is I want to invest more and more into it as it keeps growing and I get my preferred returns and equity gains that, a model is there and the competition is a lot less because your competition for development is always, hey, let's go build some A+ homes, brand new condo, luxury, everything. But right now they're getting hit hard, and
Yeah.
you're in the right, you took the, like you mentioned before, you took the easy way, hard way, but easy differentiation. And, it's boring, but you're going over time and you're creating a better model over time, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate all that. It's all correct. Sustainability of the economic model is a real key, right? In other words, as we look to the future, like, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we go, hey, a recession's coming. Like, we don't know when exactly. We don't know what it's going to be. We didn't even know if it was going to affect real estate the same way we did in 2008. In fact, our assessment of, our read of the market was it would be different because last time it was hit real estate really hard. This time, not that real estate's not hit, but, we wouldn't expect a repeat of that, right? We didn't have the same economic conditions as we did in 2006 and 2007. And that's really our offer to, when we talk with investors, we go, look, we want to be investing ourselves and invest your capital as a sponsor into projects that have a really good long-term sustainable cash flow narrative, right? Undersupplied, high demand, right? Like low competition, right? It's hard to develop in California, man. It's like the hardest state in the United States to develop new housing. And our production levels of how new housing show it. I mean, we're the worst producing housing market state in the United States. And that's a bad thing for people who live here. But if for folks like us who can deliver into that market, it's like we're protected to some degree, as long as we don't build housing that everybody else is doing, because other people do build in California. So right now what we're seeing is the hardest hit is the studio and 1-bedroom apartment market, like new housing, studios in downtown LA or downtown Long Beach or, major urban central business districts. That's the toughest market right now. But guess what? That tenant is a single earner household. Ours are multi-earner. That's really if you look at the key for our product type, it's multi-earner versus single earner, right? This is what makes us recession resilient, is that, like somebody's capability to sustain, right? If somebody loses their job, well, you got 3 other incomes to pick up the slack, right? And obviously, I suppose everybody could get laid off, but it's not happening. We don't see that in any of the tenant profiles that we have.
I like that too, because I always like to have, multi-earners versus single earners. Just you're definitely reducing risk by far. And, everyone being on a lease together and being accountable, they'll work harder to make sure they sustain the model rather and the rents versus, just I can't afford it, walk away, right, and leave everything there.
That's right.
So that's a great part of it too. And, especially during this time, you mentioned like new condos, single family home studios. Yeah, they're hit hard, and even people knew the recession was coming. No one knew when, but at least you guys took the likelihood to prepare for it upfront. I don't think everyone out there prepared upfront for this, and just said, "I'll just wait till it happens, and then we'll see what goes on."
Well, all the seasoned guys who've been through recessions before, they were planning for it. Now they may still choose to do studio units, but they go, "Oh, I got enough financial capability that if I get hit, I can sustain it." Maybe there's an economic financial model that protects them versus a product differentiation. But anybody who's seasoned would definitely be worried about it.
What do you think's going to happen? And what's your forecast for 2021 and beyond? What do you think's happening right now? What do you think's going to happen next
Yeah,
1 to 5 years?
we are at like an inflection point like we've never seen before. So, and I mean at several levels. So politically, economically, as an example, on some of our social media channels have been sharing out a graph of, something like 45% of the dollars in the economy have come into the marketplace like in the last 10 months. And I may be getting the numbers off slightly, but the stimulus coming into the economy is massive and unprecedented and like we've never seen before. And so as we look at that, obviously the stimulus is needed and helpful, right? People need help. The coronavirus and the shutdowns have really hammered a lot of people, right, in this, in this K-shaped recovery. and the stimulus is coming into the marketplace, but we start to look at the second and third tier effects of stimulus. Yeah, immediately people get 1,200 and they get 600, and banks have liquidity and bond markets have liquidity, and treasuries, all that kind of stuff. And so it's a needed thing. But then we go, oh, and then what happens, when we get to the next step and the step after that? So one of the things that we're looking at, and we follow one of the practices that I created post 2008 recession, was to track several economic information sources, either be it classic economists or people that were out there that were very savvy people about economics, even if they weren't trained economists. And some of the stuff I'm happy to share, actual names. But we really made it a practice to track several economic sources, because we want to get a broad coverage of different economic, insights and opinions and anticipations of the future, right? Both for real estate and economic cycle and economics generally. And really with this specific criteria, that they had to be economic sources that didn't have a hidden agenda, right? That they weren't writing for the New York Times and they were saying the economy is going to be bad because they're selling a book, right? Oh, my book's coming out, so I better get newsworthy, and sky is falling. Paul Krugman's famous for that, man. The guy's perma bear, right? They call him. Sky's always falling, and at some point, the sky is falling, but at another point in the cycle, it's not. We're in a rising economy, right? And in 2020, it's craziness. The economic cycle has been changed in a way that we've never seen it before. So, the stimulus is going to have an effect, and, inflation is the likely effect. In fact, some people are contemplating hyperinflation, but the reality is that so much stimulus going into the economy can't but create some change in it. Now, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. And as long as people overseas are buying our treasuries and want to transact in dollars, that has a suppressive effect on inflation, right? We didn't see inflation after all the QE, all the stimulus in 2008. And we probably should have. But now the stimulus is so massive. The graph for stimulus is going like straight up.
Yeah.
We're, and the amount of dollars, and we're not done, right? I think we're, somebody I was listening to, there's an economist named Danielle Martino Booth, I believe is her name. And she's like, QE3, QE4, QE, forever, infinite, people call it. And so you go that. And then, if you look at it in a bigger sense, we're in this time period, for better or worse, where I believe, and I'm as American centric as anybody. Like, I'm a firm believer in the American story. But the reality is China is a rising force economically. And it is known that, when in a long cycle, and there's a terminology for it, which I'll try to remember, but, when a country becomes the world's reserve currency and the lead economy in the world, so think Rome, right? Think the British Empire, and then the United States after that. There's sort of a certain life cycle for a country to sustain the leadership in that sort of economic and political role, and it doesn't last forever. And so, for better or worse, I think we're at the point where America is going to be leaving that, that leadership position, and it appears that China is the ascendant power. And again, I don't wish that, but the reality is we have to think about that from an economic standpoint. So what does that do to if the US dollar hegemony, as they call it, which is the US dollar being the top currency that's traded around the world, if we leave that hegemony, the US dollar currency is going to be affected, right? In fact, the value is going to be lost. And so if currency devalues, then inflation, is inflation, right? Devaluation of currency or devaluation of currency is inflation. So we need to think about that. Like, how does real estate, perform in that inflationary environment, right? Plus the stimulus. So there's all these cross currents coming in, and I won't try to go too deep into it, but we just continue to assess our product offer and our development, business plan for now, in the near term and the long term future economic situations, as best we can tell from sources that we trust that have shown the capability to anticipate economic trends and changes appropriately, that they don't have a hidden agenda, right? The people who try to sell gold, the world's always going to end tomorrow, right? Invest in gold today because the world's ending tomorrow. Well, they've been saying that all the time for years. Bitcoin is a whole conversation, which we won't get into necessarily, but that appears to be potentially a store of value, a new source of money and store of value that is outside the fiat currency system that we presently have, the US dollar and the Chinese yuan and other euro currencies. So our assessment is, we continue to operate this workforce housing undersupply story for the now and near-term economy in California and the United States, right? Working class families are under pressure. That inflationary environment, by the way, is affecting middle-class families. So affordable housing is the story that we're going to be in for probably several decades, right? And we don't produce enough housing to catch up, or the right type of housing, particularly in California. And then as for protecting our capital, investors' capital, what's the long-term story for this? So undersupplied workforce housing, middle-class families under pressure, they need, housing that fulfills their lifestyle. Millennial generation probably is not going to produce the incomes sufficient to buy as much housing to own as we did historically for baby boomers and Gen X. And that's an unfortunate condition. But if we look at it, historically and on a go-forward basis, then millennials will need a housing offer that can serve their family lifestyle appropriately and affordably. And can we be that offer, right? And we actually think there's a story about, build to rent housing for, families that need it economically and culturally and, their lifestyle. Like, I got a big family, I need a big house, that kind of thing. And then the other thing is we're tracking is, we think there's going to be a higher propensity for 20 to 40-year-old demographic to live in an unmarried and not a family state, which means that they're going to probably be living more in roommate situations because their economic situation and their, unmarried state sort of produces a roommate choice. And, we're a housing type where we think that's going to be attractive to roommates. And in fact, we're already seeing it right now in coronavirus, where we have, our biggest pickup in absorption of our units is for professional roommates that have been released from their geographic locations for their companies, meaning the company went to work virtually. And then all of a sudden these roommate groups form and they go, hey, we can live wherever we want, right? We're location agnostic. We don't care. So we're going to pick here or here or here, completely unrelated to where their jobs are. And they find their roommates or their friends and they sort of combine together. And so because we're a 5-bedroom unit, we're actually finding people that'll be through 3 roommates and they use 2 of the extra 2 bedrooms as their work from home space, right? And they make plenty of money as 3 income earners in the household. So much so that they can afford to have 2 of the bedrooms, unoccupied, at least from a living standpoint. And we're fine with that. I mean, it's not our focus. Our focus continues to be on middle income families, which we think, social impact, that's the biggest need. But of course, we're a company that needs to generate returns and even market superior rents to our investors and for ourselves. And so from a pragmatic standpoint, we need to serve the market, in the most effective way we can to serve families and roommates that need the housing and produce yield for our investors.
Nice. I completely agree. I think that the insights you're giving into the market is really valuable because when you look at investors and syndicators out there, the ones that we choose to work with and want to work with are the ones who actually value the insights and looking at global economy and the scales and seeing what's happening to the world and understanding that and creating the storyline that makes sense for future investors and how your plans are to keep investing, keep developing, and sustain the model and make money and returns for your investors makes sense. Those who just stay in the bubble and don't look at the outside global economy and what's happening, and like you said, things are changing. US will not be the number one forever in terms of just being the leader of currency, right? It's going to change, and Bitcoin is going to change as well. And seeing what's happening in the future and focusing your real estate product on how do you sustain and grow and deal with recession proofing your business so that you'll be here at the end of time makes valuable sense. And I like to invest my money, our funds, with investors and even ourselves into the right products, the right JV partnerships, and the right syndications and developments to, keep our clientele, really invested in understanding and creating generational wealth through wealth preservation. It makes total sense. It's scary out there when you look at some who don't look at all these things and think about it and understand what's really changing. That's the scary part of it, right?
I'm scared every day for not for us necessarily, but looking at what other people are doing. The philosophy I have is, all interpretations are valid, right? Like somebody says, hey, value add is good. New development is interpretation we think is good, but not all interpretations are powerful, right? So they're all valid. Like everybody has an opinion. You go, great, but what's the opinion or the interpretation that makes you money, or protects your investment, or sustains for the long term, like effectiveness and accomplishment, achieving objectives? Like there's nothing more important than that, right? We can have all the thoughts and designs we want, but if they don't actually produce real results, then we're wasting our time and wasting our money and our investors' money, and we don't do that. And you don't, too. You work the same way.
Exactly. I think execution is everything, and using the education experience to forecast what you think might happen. Nothing's 100% bulletproof, but forecasting really systematically and logically and taking conservative risk is kind of a way to recession proof yourself and your company. So, we're about to wrap up the show, but I wanted to ask you, what's one last thing is, any advice you would give to entrepreneurs starting out, or even investors right now starting out? Like, how do they invest? How do they invest with you? What do you think they should look at or question about the economy, about the investors groups?
Well, one of the things I would do is encourage people to go to our website, www.urbanpacific.com. And we have a section there called Investor Education. And we have a ton of articles and videos and, papers that we've written that answer a lot of these questions. We really write from a real estate investor centric voice, right? Like we go, hey, if I was an investor, how could I look at this? How could I underwrite this apartment or, that deal? Or, we talked about the, ways to build your real estate development career, which isn't investor advice, but the same pragmatic tactics in there, can apply to investors. In fact, what I'll do, Matthew, is people want to go to our website, www.urbanpacific.com/ebook.
Okay.
We have an offer for people to receive a free ebook that's titled How to Thrive and Survive a Recession, which I think is a good timely subject matter. And there's a lot of, sort of same thinking that I gave today, although it's coalesced in one ebook about like things that you can do to sustain through a recession. How do you prepare yourself for a recession is going to come? And I think all those lessons would be applicable to anybody who's, thinking about a change in course or pivot in their real estate, business or investment style, or getting into the industry. I think that book would have a lot of value. And then, when people go on the website, our contact page has, all our team members' email addresses, and, people can feel free to email me if they wanted to get in touch with me. So nice. I think that's how I would advise people. At least, hopefully we can provide a good information source to answer many of those questions.
I think it's been really helpful. I think it's, for this podcast, I think people need to listen twice and, re-listen to it just to really take in all the great information you provided today, Scott. It's really helpful to get your insight, especially from, a person like you who's done so much in business for 20 years. It helps us figure out our next steps too. As, young millennials and building our investments now, we have to realize too, learn from the best who's been out there for the longest to understand what's happening and changing, right? One last question is, you mentioned earlier, how do people intern with you anyways?
They could just contact me via email or anybody on our team. And just, if you're interested, just send us an email.
Cool. And then we can look on your website too, as well, if we're interested in investing with you guys as well, right? And get in touch.
Definitely. And perfect. In fact, if people want to look, we don't actually have any, we had 3 investments open. We just actually completed those capital raises, but we have an project investment page as well. If people want to sign up there, you can see our offers. And then I'll just also add that we're in the process of putting together a $30+ million workforce housing equity fund that should be launching in the next 60 to 90 days. So that will be an opportunity in the future as well.
Okay, perfect. 69 days. Yeah, because right now, like for example, my company, we actually have we're building a private equity real estate fund right now to raise capital for investments just like yours. So
Gotcha.
something we'll talk about shortly too to see how we can work on those projects.
Perfect. Yeah.
So everyone out there, be sure to reach Scott at choppin@urbanpacific.com. And thanks so much for being on the Truth About Real Estate podcast. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Have a great day.